Barber Paradox. Imagine a small town with a curious rule. There is only one barber, and he follows a very strict routine. He shaves every person in town who does not shave themselves, and only those people. If you shave yourself, the barber leaves you alone. If you don't, the barber shaves you. Seems simple enough, until you ask one question. Who shaves the barber? At first, this feels like a riddle, with a clever answer hiding just around the corner. But the deeper you think about it, the more tangled it becomes. If the barber shaves himself, then according to the rule, he shouldn't, because he only shaves those who don't shave themselves. But if he doesn't shave himself, then he must, because he shaves everyone who doesn't shave themselves. Either way, the rule is broken. The barber ends up stuck in a logical loop, trapped by a contradiction that seems impossible to escape. This is the Barber Paradox, a famous thought experiment introduced by British philosopher and mathematician Bertrand Russell. On the surface, it may seem like a quirky puzzle, but it actually points to a profound issue in the foundations of logic and mathematics. The paradox arises from what's called self-reference, when a rule or system tries to apply to itself. In the case of the barber, the rule defining who he shaves also includes himself, and that's where things go off the rails. To understand the paradox more clearly, imagine the townspeople split into two categories, those who shave themselves and those who don't. The barber is supposed to serve only the latter group, but once you try to decide which group he belongs to, the whole system collapses. If he's in the group that shaves themselves, he shouldn't be shaving himself. If he's in the group that doesn't shave themselves, then he's supposed to be shaving himself. It's a classic no-win situation. Russell introduced this paradox not just to confuse people, but to shine a light on a deeper problem in mathematics, particularly in the branch known as set theory, which deals with collections of objects. At the time, mathematicians believed that you could form any set you wanted, like the set of all books or the set of all even numbers. But Russell asked, what about the set of all sets that do not contain themselves? If that set contains itself, then by definition it shouldn't. If it doesn't, then by definition it should. This contradiction, now known as Russell's paradox, rocked the mathematical world and forced major changes in how we define logical systems. The Barber Paradox is a simplified version of this idea, created to help people understand the strange consequences of self-referential definitions. It shows how easily logic can break down when a system tries to include itself in its own rules. And this isn't just abstract philosophy, it has real-world consequences. In computer science, for example, self-referential programs can create infinite loops or systems. Crashes. In artificial intelligence and programming, avoiding these kinds of paradoxes is crucial for designing systems that function properly. Philosophically, the paradox reveals something unsettling, that even our most trusted tools for understanding the world, logic, rules, definitions, have limits. We like to think that if we just think hard enough or build precise enough rules, we can solve any problem. But the barber reminds us that sometimes the problem is the rule itself. When systems turn inward and begin to reference themselves, contradictions can emerge that can't be solved from within. So what's the solution? The truth is, there isn't one. At least not within the rules of the paradox. The only way out is to change the framework, to redefine the system, so that self-reference doesn't create logical disaster. That's what mathematicians had to do after Russell's discovery. They developed more robust versions of set theory that avoided these circular traps. In the end, the Barber Paradox might seem like a playful brain teaser, but it opens the door to some of the deepest and most important questions in logic, mathematics, and philosophy. It forces us to question our assumptions, rethink how we build systems, and remember that even simple ideas can hide incredible complexity. And that's the strange power of a paradox. It shows us just how tricky truth can be.
Bootstrap Paradox.
Imagine receiving a book filled with revolutionary ideas, only to discover that it was written by you, even though you haven't written it yet. Now picture yourself traveling back in time and giving that very book to your younger self. Your younger self uses it to grow up and write the same book, completing a perfect circle. The question then becomes, where did the book actually come from? This is the Bootstrap Paradox, one of the most mind-bending concepts in the realm of time travel, where an object or piece of information loops endlessly through time without any clear point of origin. Named after the phrase, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, which describes doing something seemingly impossible, the paradox is built on that same strange logic. Something exists only because it created itself, with no external cause. A classic example involves a scientist who invents a time machine, travels back in time, and hands the blueprints to their younger self. That younger self uses the blueprints to build the machine, grows up, and eventually travels back in time to pass on the plans again. But where did the idea for the machine originally come from? It wasn't invented. It simply exists in an eternal loop, with no true beginning. This paradox challenges one of our most basic assumptions about reality, that every effect must have a cause. In the bootstrap scenario, cause and effect become so tangled that they lose all meaning. The time machine exists, yes, but its existence is self-contained, endlessly recycling itself through time. What makes the Bootstrap Paradox so fascinating is that it's not just science fiction. It has serious implications for how we understand time, free will, and causality. In daily life, time flows in one direction, past to present to future. Actions have consequences, and causes lead to effects. But time travel flips this on its head. The future can influence the past, and the origin of events becomes impossible to trace. Philosophically, the paradox raises uncomfortable questions about free will. If something like a book or invention has no original creator, are the characters involved just following a script written by the loop? Or does the loop itself represent a new kind of freedom, one that exists outside of linear time? Fiction has explored this paradox extensively. In The Terminator, a character travels back to protect the future savior of humanity, but ends up causing the very events that lead to that savior's rise. In The Time Traveler's Wife, the characters' lives are bound in a self-contained loop where events unfold because they always have. These stories reflect the paradox's eerie logic, where time folds in on itself and outcomes are both inevitable and originless. From a scientific standpoint, the Bootstrap Paradox connects to theories of closed, time-like curves, loops in space-time allowed by general relativity. While still theoretical, such loops suggest that time not be a straight line, but a bendable fabric where the past and future intermingle. What's even more mind-blowing is that the paradox applies to information too. Imagine a scientific formula that exists only because it was sent back in time. If no one actually invented it, does it even count as knowledge? This challenges our understanding of creation, originality, and existence itself. In broader terms, the Bootstrap Paradox invites us to reconsider the nature of the universe. If time can fold back on itself, then perhaps the universe has no true beginning or end, just an endless, interconnected cycle. Maybe the Big Bang wasn't the start of everything, but simply one chapter in a grand cosmic loop. So can the Bootstrap Paradox be solved? Not within our current understanding of time and causality. It exists precisely because it doesn't fit our rules. It isn't a puzzle to crack, but a doorway into deeper, more complex questions about how reality works. It reminds us that the universe, despite all our knowledge, still holds mysteries that defy logic. And maybe that's its greatest gift, not a solution, but an invitation to imagine new possibilities, where beginnings blur into endings, and time becomes a mirror reflecting itself forever. Card Paradox. The card paradox is one of those delightfully unsettling puzzles that seems harmless at first. Just two simple statements written on opposite sides of a card. but quickly plunges us into a vortex of contradiction, confusion, and philosophical wonder. Picture this. On one side of the card it reads, "The statement on the other side of this card is true." You flip it over, and the other side says, "The statement on the other side of this card is false." It sounds almost childishly simple, even amusing. But the more you think about it, the more you realize something is seriously wrong. If the first statement is true, then the second statement, saying the first is false, must also be true, which contradicts the first statement's truth. But if the first statement is false, that means the second statement is false as well, which would make the first one true again, and so the loop begins. This is the essence of the card paradox, a maddeningly simple, self-referential loop that breaks the ordinary rules of logic and forces us to question what we mean when we say something is true or false. The paradox belongs to a broader class known as self-referential paradoxes, which includes classics like the liar's paradox, the statement, "This sentence is false." These paradoxes are more than word games. They expose the hidden fragility in our most basic systems of thought. In logic, there is something called the law of the excluded middle. A statement must either be true or false. There is no middle ground. But the card paradox defies this rule. It presents a situation in which assigning a truth value to either statement causes the entire structure to collapse into contradiction. This is not just a quirky glitch in reasoning. It's a deep insight into the limits of how formal systems handle meaning and self-reference. To understand the true significance of the card paradox, we must look to thinkers like the mathematician Kurt Gödel, who in the 1930s proved something astonishing. In any formal system complex enough to include arithmetic, there will always be true statements that cannot be proven within that system. These are Gödel's incompleteness theorems, and they shook the foundations of mathematics and logic. The card paradox acts as a miniature illustration of Gödel's insight. It gives us a peek into the idea that no logical system can be both complete and consistent. There will always be some questions that cannot be answered without stepping outside the very framework you are using to ask them. Beyond its implications for logic, the card paradox also raises fascinating issues about language. Language, after all, is our primary tool for constructing reality. We use it to describe, to argue, to infer, and to persuade. But the card paradox reveals that language can sometimes tie itself into knots. When language refers to itself, especially in contradictory ways, it opens the door to confusion and ambiguity. And this isn't just a problem for philosophers or mathematicians. This happens in real life, in politics, media, and personal relationships, where statements are crafted to mean both everything and nothing at once. The paradox reminds us to be vigilant about the precision and implications of our words. Psychologically, the card paradox taps into our discomfort with uncertainty. As humans, we crave closure, clarity, and certainty. We want to know whether a statement is true or false, so we can move on with confidence. But the card paradox denies us this closure. It confronts us with an unsolvable riddle, forcing us to sit with ambiguity. And while this may feel frustrating, it's also a profound opportunity. It challenges us to develop cognitive flexibility, the ability to tolerate and even appreciate complexity and contradiction. Not every question has a neat answer, not every system is stable, and not every truth is absolute. In the end, what the card paradox teaches us is that even the most basic seeming elements of truth, logic, and language are more fragile than we think. It invites us to be humble in the face of complexity and to question the assumptions we take for granted. It pushes us to think more deeply about how meaning is constructed and how systems, whether linguistic, logical, or societal, can unravel when they become too inwardly focused. Perhaps most importantly, it invites us to see beauty in the unresolved, to find fascination in the idea that some puzzles are meant not to be solved, but to be lived with. So, the next time you hold a card with two simple sentences, remember, it's not just a paradox. It's a mirror, reflecting the intricate, tangled, and endlessly fascinating nature of human understanding. Catch-22 Paradox. You need to escape, but the only way out is to prove you're insane. The catch? The very act of trying to escape proves you're sane enough to stay. This is the catch-22, a paradox that traps you in a no-win situation where every choice cancels itself out. It's not just a problem of logic. It's a reflection of how systems can be designed in ways that frustrate, trap, and disempower. Circular, absurd, and deeply relatable, the catch-22 paradox is one of the most enduring metaphors for modern life. The term originates from Joseph Heller's 1961 novel Catch-22, where it refers to a military regulation during wartime. In the book, soldiers who want to avoid flying dangerous missions must prove they are insane. But if a soldier requests to be excused, that very request demonstrates a concern for self-preservation, which is considered rational. And if they don't request it, they're willingly putting themselves in harm's way, arguably insane but still stuck. Either way, the rule traps them. There's no escape. The genius of this paradox is how it captures the twisted logic of bureaucratic systems, rules that seem logical on the surface but collapse into absurdity when applied to real human situations. The catch-22 isn't confined to fiction. It appears everywhere in everyday life. Take job hunting, for example. Many entry-level jobs require prior experience, but how do you gain experience if no one will hire you in the first place? Or consider credit building. You need credit to qualify for loans, but you need loans to build credit. These are modern catch-22s. Systems where the requirements cancel each other out, and individuals are left stuck, not by failure or laziness, but by structural contradiction. What makes the catch-22 so infuriating is that it's not just a tough choice, it's a closed loop. Every attempt to solve the problem circles back to the beginning. You can't move forward, not because you've chosen poorly, but because the system is designed in a way that makes movement impossible. This isn't just about frustration, it's about power. In every catch-22, the system holds all the authority. The rules serve not to protect, but to preserve control. Individuals are forced to comply, with no appeal, no fairness, and often no clear origin of the rule itself. Beyond personal inconvenience, the catch-22 also reveals a darker truth about institutions. Bureaucracies, governments, legal systems, even academic institutions can create paradoxes where compliance becomes impossible and resistance is punished. You need approval to get a document, but the document is required for approval. You can't take a course without a prerequisite, but that prerequisite is only offered within the course. These paradoxes aren't just errors. They're features of systems that prioritize order over logic, rules over people. Philosophically, the catch-22 challenges how we view logic and fairness. We like to believe that rules exist to provide clarity and justice, that systems are built to help things function smoothly. But the catch-22 shows how logic, when applied blindly, can become a tool of oppression. It reminds us that rules must be questioned, especially when they result in absurd outcomes. When logic disconnects from human experience, it no longer serves truth, it serves control. And yet, the reason the catch-22 has endured isn't just because it's clever. It's because it reflects something deeply human. It captures that gnawing feeling we've all had when stuck in an impossible situation, when every path forward is blocked by contradictory demands. Whether it's in navigating government red tape, office politics, or societal expectations, the catch-22 is a metaphor for the frustrations we face every day. So what can we do when we're caught in a catch-22? The first step is to recognize it. Naming the paradox gives you clarity. You might not be able to break the rules, but understanding the structure lets you look for workarounds, creative alternatives, allies within the system, or new paths outside of it. Sometimes the solution isn't to solve the paradox directly, but to expose it, to question why it exists, and to push for change. The Catch-22 also invites a larger cultural and moral question. Why do we allow systems to operate this way? Are these paradoxes the result of poor design, or do they serve a purpose? Often, Catch-22s protect the status quo. They maintain hierarchies, resist change, and make it harder for people to challenge authority. By identifying these patterns and calling them out, we begin to loosen the system's grip. Ultimately, the Catch-22 is more than a puzzle, it's a mirror. It reflects the absurdities of our world, the tension between human needs and institutional rigidity, between logic and lived experience. While we may not always escape the paradox, we can learn from it. It urges us to think critically about the rules we live by, to spot the invisible traps, and to advocate for systems that serve people, not just themselves. So the next time you find yourself stuck in a bureaucratic loop, unable to move forward or backward, remember, you're not alone. The Catch-22 is a paradox that has baffled, amused, and frustrated people for decades, and it likely always will. But by recognizing it, questioning it, and refusing to accept it as normal, you begin to reclaim agency. And in that awareness lies the first step toward breaking the cycle.
Crocodile Paradox.
Imagine standing at the edge of a river, breath shallow, heart pounding, watching helplessly as a crocodile emerges from the water, your child clutched in its jaws. The creature's eyes meet yours, cold and unblinking. And then, impossibly, it speaks. I will return your child if and only if you correctly guess what I will do next. In that moment, the world around you freezes. What began as a desperate plea for life has now twisted into a chilling game of logic. This isn't just a test of survival. It's a trap designed to break reason itself. This thought experiment, known as the Crocodile Paradox, has puzzled philosophers and logicians for centuries. At first glance, it might seem like a bizarre moral riddle, but at its core it explores the boundaries of knowledge, truth, and the contradictions that arise when language turns on itself. Let's carefully walk through this mental maze and uncover the layers beneath the surface. Suppose you answer the crocodile with, "You will return my child." If the crocodile was planning to return the child, your prediction is correct, and by the terms of its promise, it should fulfill the deal. No contradiction arises, everything makes sense. However, if the crocodile was planning to keep the child, then your guess is wrong, and the crocodile is under no obligation to return them. This scenario, while cruel, remains logically sound because your guess either aligns or misaligns with the crocodile's pre-decided action, and there's no contradiction. Now consider the second option. You answer, "You will not return my child." If the crocodile had planned to keep the child, your prediction is now correct. But according to its own condition, if your guess is correct, it must return the child, which contradicts its plan. On the other hand, if it had planned to return the child, your prediction is incorrect, and by the rule, the crocodile should not return the child. But that would mean it ends up keeping the child, which then makes your original prediction true. Either way, the crocodile is caught in a loop, where fulfilling the condition both validates and invalidates the promise simultaneously. This is where the true paradox lies, a contradiction that cannot be resolved by any consistent logic. At its heart, the Crocodile Paradox is a self-referential problem, much like the famous liar's paradox, where someone says, "This statement is false. If the statement is true, then it must be false, but if it's false, then it must be true." The crocodile's promise works the same way. The moment it hinges its action on your prediction, the structure collapses under its own logic. But this isn't just a clever brain teaser. It's a mirror reflecting something deeper about the promises we make and the systems of authority we create. When a promise can't logically be upheld, is it a real promise? When the rules of a deal are set up to guarantee a contradiction, can we call that fair? In the real world, we often encounter similar traps, contracts filled with loopholes, political pledges crafted to sound good but never meant to be fulfilled, and personal dilemmas where every option leads to regret. These are all echoes of the crocodile's game. They reveal how logic can be twisted to create the illusion of fairness while hiding a rigged structure beneath. What's most chilling is that the crocodile in this scenario isn't simply playing along. It designed the trap. It created the condition, knowing full well that no answer can ever cleanly fulfill it. In that way, the crocodile becomes a symbol of authority that manipulates logic to maintain control, ensuring that no matter what you do, it stays in power. This paradox isn't about a predator and its prey. It's about power, manipulation, and the illusion of choice. Can the crocodile paradox be solved? Most scholars would say, no. Not because it's flawed, but because it's not meant to be solved. It's a philosophical experiment, a mental knot designed to reveal the limits of logic, language, and our assumptions about justice. It forces us to confront the idea that not every problem has a clean resolution, and not every promise is meant to be kept. Sometimes, the real wisdom lies not in trying to outsmart the trap, but in recognizing that it is a trap. And in moments like these, the only true power you may have is the awareness that the game was never fair to begin with.
Dichotomy Paradox. The Dichotomy Paradox draws us into a seemingly simple scene. You're about to cross a room, a task you perform daily without thought. But as Zeno of Elea proposed over 2,000 years ago, the act of moving from one place to another isn't as straightforward as it appears. According to the paradox, before you can reach your destination, you must first get halfway there. Once you've done that, you must travel half the remaining distance, and then half of that, and so on, infinitely. This creates an infinite sequence of smaller and smaller tasks, each requiring completion before the next step can begin. At face value, this means you'd never finish the journey or even begin it, because you'd be trapped performing an infinite number of motions. And yet, you do cross the room. The paradox jolts us into confronting a disconnect between everyday experience and the deeper implications of logic and mathematics. Zeno's Dichotomy Paradox is more than a clever brain teaser. It forces us to reckon with the concept of infinity, not in the distant stars or abstract math, but in the space beneath our feet. If you keep dividing a distance in half, there's no point at which the divisions stop. The implications are profound. If space and time are infinitely divisible, then every action, no matter how small, consists of an infinite number of steps. So how can motion be real? The answer, at least on the surface, lies in calculus. Mathematicians discovered that the infinite series Zeno described, 1/2 plus 1/4 plus 1/4 plus 1/16, and so on, is a convergent series. That means that although it contains infinitely many terms, their sum approaches a finite value. You can slice up the journey into as many pieces as you like, but the total still adds up to the actual distance of the room. In this view, infinite steps can still take a finite amount of time. So mathematically, the paradox is resolved. You can complete the journey because the infinity involved isn't endless in effect. It's just conceptually infinite. Yet the paradox doesn't end with math. It cuts deeper into the very foundations of our understanding of the universe. Is space actually infinitely divisible, or does there come a point at which division stops making sense? Quantum mechanics suggests the latter. According to modern physics, there's a smallest meaningful unit of length, Planck length, and a smallest measurable unit of time, Planck time. At scales smaller than these, the fabric of reality becomes fuzzy and indeterminate. If that's true, then the infinite subdivisions of Zeno's paradox don't reflect the real world. They're artifacts of an abstract model that doesn't fully capture physical reality. In other words, the universe itself may have built-in limits that dissolve the paradox before it even arises. But what if motion isn't about passing through infinite positions? What if it's a relational event, as Einstein's theory of relativity suggests? A change in the spatial relationship between two objects within a larger field of space-time. If motion isn't a sequence of snapshots, but a dynamic unfolding, then Zeno's slicing and dividing may be a misinterpretation of what movement really is. But perhaps the most enduring power of Zeno's dichotomy paradox lies in its ability to unsettle our confidence in the obvious. It reminds us that even something as intuitive and commonplace as walking can unravel into a mystery when examined closely. It warns us that our reasoning, however logical, can lead us to absurd conclusions if we fail to test our assumptions against reality. And it shows that the border between the possible and the impossible often lies not in the world itself, but in how we think about it. In the end, Zeno's paradox doesn't prove that motion is impossible. It proves that our intuitions about time, space, and infinity can be misleading. It bridges philosophy and physics, logic and lived experience. And in doing so, it opens our eyes to a world where the most ordinary acts, like taking a single step, might carry within them the seeds of infinite wonder.
Fermi Paradox. The universe is vast, so vast that it contains hundreds of billions of galaxies, each filled with billions of stars, many of which have planets orbiting them. Given these staggering numbers, it seems almost inevitable that intelligent life must exist somewhere else in the cosmos. And yet, despite decades of searching, we've found nothing. No signals, no spacecraft, no evidence of alien civilizations. This puzzling contradiction is known as the Fermi Paradox, one of the most compelling questions humanity has ever asked. If the universe is so big, where is everyone? The paradox is named after physicist Enrico Fermi, who famously posed the question during a casual lunch conversation in 1950. The math suggests that intelligent life should be common. Even if life emerges on just a tiny fraction of planets, there should still be millions, possibly billions of advanced civilizations in our galaxy alone. And if even a small percentage of those civilizations develop interstellar travel, they should have spread across the stars by now. So why is the universe so eerily silent? One possible answer is that intelligent civilizations are incredibly rare. While the ingredients for life, like water, carbon, and energy, are widespread, the leap from simple organic molecules to complex, intelligent organisms might be so improbable that it has only happened once, here on Earth. In that case, humanity could be a cosmic fluke, the result of an unrepeatable chain of accidents. Another possibility is that intelligent civilizations do exist, but they're simply too far away to detect. The scale of the universe is nearly incomprehensible. Even light, the fastest thing we know, would take over 100,000 years just to cross our galaxy. If alien civilizations are scattered across such vast distances, their signals, if they're sending any, may not have reached us yet. Or perhaps we lack the technology to detect them at all. But what if intelligent life is nearby and we still can't see it? This leads to another unsettling idea. Maybe they don't want to be found. Just as humans are cautious about revealing their location in the wild, perhaps advanced alien civilizations are deliberately staying silent. They could be observing us from afar, following a kind of non-interference policy. This idea is known as the zoo hypothesis, the notion that Earth is like an exhibit in a galactic zoo, watched but left undisturbed. Then there's the darker possibility. Perhaps intelligent civilizations tend to destroy themselves before they can make contact. With great technological power comes great risk: nuclear weapons, climate collapse, uncontrolled artificial intelligence. It's possible that once a species reaches a certain level of advancement, self-destruction becomes inevitable. The galaxy might be littered with the silent remnants of civilizations that rose, peaked, and vanished. It's also possible that alien life is so different from us that we wouldn't recognize it, even if it were right in front of us. We tend to imagine aliens as humanoid beings or advanced societies using familiar technologies like radio signals. But life elsewhere could operate on entirely different principles, made of unfamiliar chemistry, communicating in ways we can't detect, or existing in dimensions beyond our perception. They might even be here already, and we simply lack the means to notice. The Fermi Paradox forces us to confront not just the immensity of the universe, but also the limitations of our own imagination and assumptions. It's easy to think of ourselves as central to the story, but the cosmos doesn't owe us any answers. Whether intelligent life is rare, distant, hidden, or extinct, each explanation changes how we see ourselves and our place in the universe. Some scientists suggest that the paradox may have a simpler explanation. Maybe we just haven't been looking long enough, or in the right way. Modern technology has only allowed us to search for extraterrestrial signals for a few decades, a blink of an eye in cosmic time. The absence of evidence may not be evidence of absence. It might simply mean, be patient. Others go further, proposing that the silence of the universe might itself be a kind of message. Perhaps the conditions that support life are so delicate, so unlikely, that intelligent civilizations are by nature rare and short-lived. Maybe we are a brief spark of awareness in an otherwise silent and indifferent cosmos. But if we truly are alone, the implications are enormous. It would mean that the future of intelligent life in the universe rests entirely on our shoulders. That we are the only voice of reason, curiosity, and consciousness in a sea of stars. That makes our survival not just a human responsibility, but a cosmic one. The Fermi Paradox doesn't give us a definitive answer, but that's part of what makes it so powerful. It invites us to ask bigger questions about life, time, evolution, destiny. It urges us to look outward, to keep exploring, and to remain humble in the face of the unknown. And in doing so, it reminds us that even in silence, the universe is speaking, if only we learn how to listen.
Friendship Paradox. Have you ever felt like your friends seem to have more friends than you do? That feeling isn't just in your head. It's a real, well-documented phenomenon known as the Friendship Paradox. This counterintuitive idea suggests that, on average, your friends are more popular than you are. It sounds strange at first, even a little unfair. But once you understand how social networks work, the paradox starts to make perfect sense and reveals something much deeper about how we compare ourselves to others. Let's begin with the math behind it. Imagine a social network. Not the digital kind, but a web of real human connections. In any group of people, some individuals have just a few friends, while others are social magnets, connected to dozens or even hundreds. Now here's the twist. The more friends someone has, the more likely they are to be connected to you. If a person has 100 friends, that's 100 chances they're your friend. If someone has only 2 friends, they've only got 2 chances. Statistically, the highly connected people are overrepresented in everyone's circle. That means, when you look around at your friends, you're more likely to be seeing the most popular ones. The result? On average, your friends appear to have more friends than you do, not because you're less social, but because popularity distorts your perception. But the friendship paradox isn't just about numbers. It's about psychology. In the age of social media, this effect becomes even more powerful. Platforms like Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok naturally highlight the lives of those with the most connections, the ones who post the most, get the most engagement, and appear most often in your feed. You end up constantly exposed to the curated highlights of the most visible people, the vacations, the parties, the achievements. This feeds into a subtle, ongoing sense of comparison. It starts to feel like everyone else is doing better, living bigger, and connecting more, when in reality, your view is skewed by the structure of the network itself. This kind of constant comparison can quietly take a toll. Studies show that social comparison is a major driver of anxiety, envy, and even depression. But the friendship paradox offers a powerful insight. The illusion isn't a reflection of your actual worth or popularity.
It's a statistical bias built into how networks function. Your friends don't appear more connected because you're less valuable. They appear that way because those who are more connected show up more often in everyone's social sphere. Interestingly, the paradox has real-world applications beyond psychology. Public health officials use it to identify the most influential people in a community during disease outbreaks.
The same principle applies to battling misinformation or launching viral content. In a way, the friendship paradox becomes a tool for amplifying messages by leveraging the natural structure of human networks. It also helps us understand inequality in influence in any system, whether it's a classroom, a workplace, or a social media platform. Connections aren't evenly distributed. A small number of people often hold outsized sway over opinions, trends, and behaviors. The paradox exposes how these imbalances shape not only our perceptions, but also our opportunities and sense of belonging. Ultimately, the most important lesson the friendship paradox offers is about perspective. It reminds us that the view we have of the world is always limited, filtered through the people we're connected to. Just as your friends might seem more popular, other aspects of life, like success, happiness, or wealth, can appear distorted depending on who surrounds you. The paradox challenges us to be mindful of these perceptions, to understand that they're often shaped more by network dynamics than personal shortcomings. So, while it might seem like everyone else is more connected or more celebrated, the truth is more nuanced. What really matters isn't how many friends you have, but the depth and authenticity of the relationships you build. The value of a friendship isn't measured by numbers, but by trust, support, and meaning, and no paradox can take that away. The grain of millet paradox invites us into a deceptively simple, yet deeply profound puzzle. If a single grain of millet falls to the ground, does it make a sound? Intuitively, the answer might be no. Surely one tiny grain can't create anything perceptible. But if a handful of grains fall, or an entire sack, the sound is unmistakable. So where does the shift occur? At what point does silence transform into noise? This ancient thought experiment, attributed to the Greek philosopher Zeno, is less about sound itself and more about the nature of perception, thresholds, and how small, nearly invisible events can aggregate into something tangible, audible, and undeniable. The paradox forces us to ask, when do tiny, seemingly meaningless actions cross the line into meaningful consequences? It's not a question of physics alone, but of philosophy, psychology, and even ethics. At its heart, this paradox confronts the idea of continuity, how a series of incremental changes can produce a dramatic outcome, even if no single step in that series appears to make a difference. It aligns with other ancient dilemmas, like the Sorites paradox, which asks how many grains of sand make a heap. Add a single grain and it's not a heap. Add another and still not. But keep going, and eventually, a heap forms. Yet no one grain seems to mark the moment when the transformation happens. The same logic applies in reverse. Remove one grain from a heap, and it remains a heap. Until at some mysterious tipping point, the heap vanishes. These paradoxes highlight how human language and perception often fail to map smoothly onto the gradations of reality, especially when dealing with scale, continuity, and change. Beyond its philosophical intrigue, the grain of millet paradox has powerful real-world implications. In the realm of perception, it reminds us that human senses have thresholds. Just because we don't hear a sound doesn't mean one wasn't made. Our ears, like all our senses, have limits. And that means our understanding of reality is filtered, incomplete, and often biased by what we can detect. The sound of a single grain may exist, but it exists beneath the radar of our awareness. This extends far beyond acoustics into every corner of life. There are entire layers of existence, microscopic, quantum, emotional, that we overlook, not because they're unimportant, but because they're simply quiet. Scientifically, this idea resonates with discoveries in fields like quantum mechanics and biology. A single atom might be invisible to the naked eye, yet its movement and energy can shape the outcome of a chemical reaction. One mutated cell might seem meaningless until it multiplies into cancer. In ecosystems, the behavior of a single insect or microbe can influence a whole food chain. Reality, it turns out, underscores that just because we don't see or hear something doesn't mean it lacks impact. The paradox also holds tremendous power in the context of ethics and social responsibility. It's easy to feel small in a world of overwhelming challenges: climate change, inequality, war, disease. One person recycling, one person voting, one person helping another might seem like a grain of millet, quiet, insignificant, lost in the noise. But when millions of individuals take action, those grains become a deafening sound, a collective roar that can shift the course of history. The paradox reminds us that every small action, no matter how trivial it may seem on its own, contributes to a larger whole. We often dismiss the small in favor of the grand, but it's the accumulation of small decisions that determines the fate of families, societies, and even civilizations. Even on a personal level, the grain of millet paradox speaks volumes. When building habits, learning skills, or overcoming adversity, progress rarely feels monumental in the moment. Practicing the piano for 20 minutes today won't make you a concert pianist, but 20 minutes every day over years transforms a beginner into a master. Reading a single page won't make you wise, but reading every day slowly reshapes your mind. Like the sound of falling millet, growth is often silent until it isn't. The paradox teaches us to respect the invisible progress, to trust in the unseen effects of repetition, and to stay committed even when results aren't immediate. Finally, this paradox serves as a quiet rebuke to our culture's obsession with instant impact and dramatic transformation. We're trained to look for big breaks and life-changing moments, but real change, the kind that endures, often starts with something imperceptible: a conversation, a choice, a thought. Something no louder than a single grain falling to the floor. Yet from these tiny beginnings, revolutions grow. The paradox is a lesson in humility and hope, urging us to reframe how we measure value and meaning. In the end, the grain of millet paradox is not just a clever riddle about sound. It's a mirror held up to our assumptions about significance. It shows us that what seems like nothing may be something in disguise, that what we overlook may hold quiet power, and that the world is not built on grand gestures alone, but on the accumulation of 1,000 small, silent acts. If even one grain matters, then so do you. And if you keep going, grain by grain, step by step, you may find that what once seemed inaudible becomes a sound that can change everything.
Grand Hotel Paradox. Imagine a hotel with an infinite number of rooms. Every single room is occupied, and yet, somehow, it can still accept new guests. How is that possible? Welcome to the Grand Hotel Paradox, one of the most mind-bending thought experiments ever conceived. Introduced by German mathematician David Hilbert, this paradox challenges our deepest intuitions about numbers, space, and the strange nature of infinity. It's a riddle that seems absurd at first glance, but within the rules of mathematics, it works perfectly. Picture the Grand Hotel. Each room is numbered: 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on, stretching endlessly. Every room is full. A traveler walks into the lobby and asks for a room. By any ordinary logic, the hotel is full, no vacancies. But the receptionist doesn't hesitate. "Of course," she says, "we have room." She then asks each current guest to move to the room with the next highest number. The person in room 1 moves to room 2. The guest in room 2 moves to room 3, and so on. Because there's no last room in an infinite sequence, this process never ends. But critically, it frees up room 1, making space for the new guest without evicting anyone. The hotel was full, and yet it wasn't. But the paradox gets even more astonishing. Suppose a bus arrives, not with one person, but with an infinite number of new guests. Surely even an infinite hotel can't accommodate an infinite busload of people, right? Wrong. Once again, the receptionist has a solution. She asks each current guest to move to the room number double their current room. Room 1 moves to 2, room 2 to 4, room 3 to 6, and so on. All the even-numbered rooms are now occupied, but all the odd-numbered rooms, another infinity, are now empty and ready for the new arrivals. The Grand Hotel has just made room for infinity within infinity. What this paradox teaches us is that infinity isn't just a really big number. It's an entirely different kind of quantity. In everyday life, when something is full, it's full. But in the world of infinity, full doesn't mean no more room. And adding more doesn't make it larger. Infinity is already unbounded. The rules that govern finite numbers collapse under the weight of actual infinity. And that's what makes the Grand Hotel so brilliantly strange. It also highlights the distinction between potential infinity and actual infinity. Potential infinity is like counting. It's a process that can go on forever. But actual infinity, as in the Grand Hotel, refers to a complete set, an infinite collection that already exists in full. Infinity plays a role in quantum mechanics and cosmology, reminding us that the universe may be far stranger and more expansive than our everyday experience allows. It also raises deep philosophical questions. If infinity behaves so differently from the world we know, can we ever truly understand it? The Grand Hotel feels absurd because it collides with our finite intuitions. We're not wired to grasp something that has no end, that can always expand yet never run out of space. It reminds us that our minds, powerful as they are, still struggle when faced with the infinite. Mathematically, the Grand Hotel is rooted in set theory, particularly the work of George Cantor, who revolutionized our understanding of infinity. He showed that there are different sizes of infinity. The set of natural numbers, 1, 2, 3, and so on, is infinite, but it's countable because we can list the elements one after another. This is the type of infinity the Grand Hotel illustrates. But Cantor also proved that some infinities, like the real numbers, which include all decimals and fractions, are uncountably infinite, a larger kind of infinity. The Grand Hotel helps us visualize just how flexible and surprising infinite sets can be. This idea even has echoes in the modern world, in fields like computer science and data science. Algorithms designed to handle large or infinite processes often rely on similar logic, breaking infinite tasks into manageable structured steps. The Grand Hotel's elegance shows us that infinite systems, while counterintuitive, can still be navigated with logic and creativity. But perhaps the most important lesson of the Grand Hotel Paradox is this. Infinity challenges us to think differently. It pushes us past the limits of common sense and into a realm where imagination, mathematics, and philosophy collide. It doesn't just stretch our understanding, it reshapes it. What seems impossible in the world of the finite becomes strangely plausible when we confront the infinite. In the end, the Grand Hotel Paradox is more than just a quirky mathematical tale. It's a doorway to deeper understanding. It invites us to let go of assumptions, to play with ideas that seem illogical, and to embrace the mystery at the heart of the universe. And maybe that's its greatest gift, reminding us that the most mind-expanding insights often begin with the simplest of questions. What if there's always room for more?
Grandfather Paradox.
The Grandfather Paradox is one of the most haunting and thought-provoking dilemmas in the realm of time travel. A paradox that slices directly through our most basic understanding of causality, the very idea that causes come before effects, that the past determines the future, not the other way around. At its heart is a deceptively simple scenario. You travel back in time and either intentionally or accidentally prevent your grandfather from meeting your grandmother. As a result, your parent is never born. And if your parent never exists,
neither do you. But here's the twist. If you were never born, then how did you travel back in time to cause that very erasure? The act of preventing your own existence undermines the possibility of you having taken the action in the first place. And yet, if you didn't exist, then the events that led to your non-existence couldn't have happened. You're caught in a closed loop of contradiction that destabilizes everything we assume about time's linear nature. This paradox isn't just a hypothetical thought exercise. It strikes at the very logic that underpins how we interpret reality. Cause and effect, in the world as we understand it, are supposed to form a chain. Event A causes event B, which causes event C. But the grandfather paradox inserts a feedback loop into that chain, where C reaches backward to destroy A. The very act of time travel becomes a weapon against itself. And so, we're forced to confront a troubling truth. If backwards time travel is possible, then either the universe allows contradictions, which would shatter the foundation of logic itself, or some mechanism must exist to prevent paradoxes from forming in the first place. One such proposed mechanism is the many worlds or parallel universe interpretation. Under this model, when you travel back in time and interfere with past events, you don't overwrite your own history. Instead, you create a divergent timeline, a branching path in the multiverse. In this new branch, your grandfather never meets your grandmother, and you are never born in that reality. But your original timeline still exists, untouched. Your journey simply forks the river of time, creating an alternate flow rather than unraveling the one you came from. In this way, the paradox is sidestepped, not by resolving the contradiction, but by compartmentalizing it into separate, internally consistent universes. Another approach to the grandfather paradox is found in the concept of closed time-like curves and the Novikov self-consistency principle. This theory, popular in certain interpretations of general relativity, suggests that events in time are fundamentally self-consistent. If you travel back in time, then anything you do there was always part of history, including your interference. You might try to stop your grandfather from meeting your grandmother, but circumstances will always conspire, subtly or dramatically, to make us
prevent you from succeeding. In this model, the timeline is like a tightly wound knot. You can loop around within it, but you can never cut through it. You were always meant to go back, and your actions were always part of the chain of events that led to your birth. This eliminates paradoxes by asserting a deterministic universe, one where free will exists only within the constraints of fate. Philosophically, the grandfather paradox raises questions that go far beyond time travel. It forces us to question whether the past is truly fixed, whether the future is open or predetermined, and whether causality is an unbreakable law or merely an illusion that breaks down at certain scales. It also raises issues about identity and continuity. If you alter the conditions that led to your birth, are you still you, or have you erased the very thread of selfhood that connects you to the act of change? In the realm of science fiction, this paradox is a favorite narrative device because it illustrates the dangers, moral dilemmas, and unintended consequences of tampering with time. From Back to the Future to Looper, stories have explored the dramatic potential of this contradiction: characters who vanish from existence, timelines collapsing, universes fracturing. These fictional explorations, while fantastical, serve to emphasize just how fragile our understanding of time really is when pushed to its limits. Scientifically, while time travel into the future is permitted under Einstein's theory of relativity due to time dilation effects at near light speeds, backward time travel remains highly speculative. Some solutions to Einstein's field equations, like rotating black holes or wormholes, mathematically allow for backwards movement in time, but they often require exotic conditions like negative energy or violate known physical principles. In many models, paradoxes like the grandfather scenario are one of the main reasons why physicists believe nature may have built-in protections, mechanisms that prevent such contradictions from ever arising.
Ultimately, the grandfather paradox is more than a quirky sci-fi dilemma. It is a mirror held up to our assumptions about time, reality, identity, and logic.